Amanda the Balloon Girl Part 2. See the first part if you want to know why I'm doing this. At first I couldn't work out what was going on. My suit, amazingly, was inflating even bigger. Then I realised that I was impaled on the sharp nozzle of the helium cylinder, which was jammed full on. It couldn't be far off bursting either, being virtually inflated to its limits already. Then I realised it was actually impaled right where my waist would have been. It was going to burst any second now, and when it burst, I was going to fall right onto the nozzle, and the cylinder was going to start releasing air, or helium, into my actual body. I could no longer see anything because the suit was now inflating around my body. I tried frantically scrubbing with my arms and legs, but they just slipped against the air balloons all over the floor that I'd inflated earlier. The last thing I remember before my costume popped was the upside down word Amanda written on the rubber. Pop! The deafening noise made my ears as the rubber layer disintegrated into tiny bits, and there was a sharp stabbing pain as I fell onto the nozzle. I was surprised that it wasn't more painful. For a brief moment I was free of the suit's constriction, wearing the inner layer of the scarlet spandex catsuit. I heard a collective gasp from the crowd as the sharp nozzle pierced my skin and the cylinder toppled over. I was now lying on my back. The nozzle had pricked my skin at a steep angle and didn't pierce any internal organs, but nevertheless it was stuck. It happened to stick into me exactly where the valve in my costume had been. Immediately there was a cold rush and a loud hissing as the helium gas forced itself under the skin of my belly. I struggled to free myself, but it was wedged between me and the wall at the side of the window display, and the air balloons I'd inflated earlier made it too hard to get a purchase on the floor. I was going to be inflated for real this time. The gas forced itself under my skin, firmly separating it from the layer underneath with a sort of ripping sensation, like cobwebs being pulled apart. There was a loud hiss as the cold gas surged into me. It spread across my belly in all directions, and I started to look more and more pregnant as it blew me up like a balloon. The swelling forced my legs apart once again, and the pressure was building constantly. Terrified, I wondered how big I'd get before I popped, and what it would feel like. The swelling was creeping up my chest now, making it swell. My bra snapped inside the catsuit somewhere, followed soon afterwards by my panties. My skin was getting very tight now, and it was all happening terribly fast. It had only been a couple of seconds and I was already hugely inflated. I cried out, "Help! Help!" But the crowd just laughed. "What a great actress," one of them said. It was one thing to wear an inflated costume, but quite another actually to be inflated for real. The pressure inside me was crushingly strong. It was getting hard to breathe, and I was still inflating. I could hardly believe it, but here I was actually blowing up like a balloon. My torso had become totally round, and the gas showed no sign of stopping. I couldn't move at all. My arms and legs were stuck out again, and the gas was actually forcing itself under my skin, which was getting tighter and tighter with every second that passed. What was going to happen? How much gas was I going to be able to contain before I popped? I was now scared to breathe too deeply in case I burst myself. All I could see in front of me now was the huge ballooning globe that my body had become. I wondered about my funeral. Would they have to put me in a really big coffin, and would people know whether to laugh or cry? If I didn't burst first, would they pop me to fit into the normal sized casket? I turned into a huge round balloon and there was no give left in my body, and I was really inflated almost at bursting point now. "Amanda, what the hell's happened? You can't inflate the suit that big. It'll burst. Let that air out right now." It was Mrs. Pyle. I tried to reply, giving short breaths for fear of exploding if I took a larger one. "Not suit. It's me." "Don't be ridiculous. People can't blow up like balloons. Go on, deflate your costume immediately." "Can't. Fell on nozzle." I was still swelling while this conversation was going on. My body started making ominous creaking noises and my skin was getting ever firmer. "Please, don't want to pop. Turn off cylinder." I was a huge inflated globe at the brink of popping now. All I could do was to flap my hands and feet uselessly at the end of my vastly inflated limbs. "Oh my God, you have been blown out like a balloon. You really have. I must turn the gas off immediately." She rushed over and struggled with the nozzle, but it was stuck. "I'll pull it out, Amanda. Don't you worry. Right now, please." The creaking had been building up to a crescendo and was now joined by a cracking noise. Then, just as I thought all hope was lost, the hiss of the gas faded and died away. The tank was empty. I would have heaved a sigh of relief if I hadn't been so worried about exploding. There I was, lying helplessly, a human balloon on the brink of bursting. My skin felt incredibly tight and thin, and I also felt very cold. All that helium inside me was at room temperature, of course, and my metabolism was now having to struggle to heat hundreds of litres of gas up to body temperature. To the extent that I could, I trembled slightly from fear and the cold, but my fresh flesh was now so tense from the gas pressure that this only produced tiny ripples on my incredibly bloated surface. My jaw was shaking. Cold! Mrs. Powell looked very worried. I'll go and get something to warm you up. Don't you worry, you'll be okay. I'll phone for an ambulance. By now, all of the shop staff were gathered around me, talking about the incident. Apparently, despite my now vast size, I was invisible, or at least they no longer thought of me as a human being, judging by their comments. We've got to get the air out of her quick. Prick her with the scissors. No, she'll pop. She'll probably pop anyway. Maybe we should put her out of her misery. What do you think it feels like to be that blown up? I think we're on TV. This has got to be a hoax. No one could really be inflated like a balloon. If she's full of helium, why isn't she floating? Don't be silly. You'd need a whole balloonful for that to work. It was very scary to have to lie there helpless while they considered and eventually rejected the idea of popping me with the scissors. Back came Mrs. Pyle with a baggy red sweatshirt big enough for a massive frame. It was red again, of course. Everything was red today. It was also the kind I would have been totally lost in before, just too baggy. I dropped into work today because I'm trying to lose weight, so I wore this. It's lovely and warm. She struggled with my legs, finally forcing my swollen right calf into one leg of the sweatpants and pulling it up to my knees. It took even longer to get my even thicker thighs into it. Then she began the even more difficult job of stuffing my left leg into the pants, which was considerable and irreducible angle to my right one. As she did this, she remembered the nozzle. Oh no, Amanda, I'm so sorry, I forgot to pull the canister out of you. This will let the gas out, won't it? Here goes. With a yank, she managed to pull the spike out of my left side. There was a very brief puff of gas, which stopped almost immediately. I couldn't see the wound, of course, as it was on the other side of the sphere that was now my body from my head. I couldn't get why I wasn't deflating, though. Surely, if the nozzle had been pulled out, the helium would start to rush out too? Apparently not. Was I going to be stuck like this for the rest of my life? How long would that be anyway? What was all the gas doing inside me doing to my body? How long could I survive as a human balloon? For the moment, all those questions remained unanswered as Mrs. Pyle finally got my leg to bend around to insert it into the left leg of the pants and pulled them up tightly. Once she'd actually reached the tops of my legs, she had to tug the waistband up to where my waist had once been. I'm sorry about this, but I'm going to have to roll you over. She gave a shove, and I rolled towards the window. It was so different than merely wearing an inflated suit, since through the tightly stretched spandex of my catsuit pressing against my skin, I could feel every bump of the weave in the carpet underneath me. My weight squeezed down my left side and made my front bulge even further forwards, while my left leg and arm were forced out to point past my head and in the opposite direction. Up until then, I'd only been able to see the ceiling and the top half of my vastly distended body, but as I was rolled over, I began to see a vague reflection of a huge round red shape in the glass, and beyond, the huge crowd of people watching me through the window. Not only that, but they had now been joined by a couple of camera crews and picture-snapping photographers whose flashes dazzled my eyes. Once on my side, Mrs. Powell hoisted up the back of my waistband over my equally inflated buttocks. My legs and lower belly started to feel a little warmer. Then she started to ease my vertical right arm into the sleeve of the zip-fronted hooded top. We're getting there, Amanda. Don't you worry about a thing. The ambulance is on its way. As she manoeuvred my arm into the sleeve, I gazed in a strangely detached manner out of the window at the crowds of bystanders and journalists. My embarrassment had now reached such a peak that it couldn't grow any further, just as I myself was now so inflated that I couldn't get any bigger. The back of the top was now draped across my own back. I have to roll you onto your front now, I'm afraid, murmured Mrs. Pyle, as she gently nudged my balloon body further. I lost sight of the window again as I was rotated onto my belly. I was terrified that this would be the end, that my weight would actually pop me if I was rolled onto my front. But although it squished my sides, breasts and groin out along with my limbs, it didn't quite stretch my skin to bursting point. I felt her stretch along the back of the top across my own back and pull it hard to push my hand into the armhole. Luckily it was stretchy as well as thick, and it reached. Then she rolled me onto my right side and set to work heaving the two halves of the bottom of the zip together, which she really had to force. Finally, she was able to zip it up slowly, and again I noticed how acutely sensitive my skin had become. I felt each tooth hook into its companion in exquisite detail, and a little thrill of vibration went through me with each tooth. Once you got past my middle, the zipping could go up at novel speed. I worried briefly about what would happen if my flesh got caught in the zipper, but it didn't happen. That would definitely be the end. I looked down at my now tightly sweatsuit-clad body. It was amazing to think that huge buggy garment, too big for someone even grossly obese, was now almost splitting at the seams around my formerly slight form. The zip wrinkled down my front, and again I got slightly scared when I wondered if the zipper pull would trick me. My whole body was as gross as it was fragile. I noticed for the first time that I could actually feel the vibrations, noises in the shop were causing inside me, and there was a steady throbbing from my heart that caused a regular pulsation in my ballooning flesh. The ambulance arrived along with the fire brigade. The latter carefully removed the window, as I was now too vast to fit through any of the doors of the shop. As they did this, I realised that although I could see some of myself, I didn't actually know exactly what my new shape was. Paramedics then slid a hammock-like structure under me and winched me carefully out of the shop into the back of the ambulance. The hosts of reporters pointed their microphones at me, asking questions like, "Amanda, how does it feel to be a human balloon? And are you planning to take illegal action against the shop?" And Mrs. Pyle stayed with me in the back of the van and held my hand, saying, "Don't worry, dear, we'll soon get all that gas out of you. Everything's going to be all right." We got to the hospital, and I was seen almost immediately by a team of medical staff who were clearly fascinated by my condition. Several of them said there had only been 2 cases before in the literature. They photographed me, measured me, weighed me and scanned me. The only things they didn't do were tell me why I wasn't deflating, how they were going to get the helium out of me, and whether I'd be okay. Eventually I was taken up to a ward where I was gently strapped into a bed, barely wide enough to prevent me falling off, and the doctor came to see me. "Any questions then, Amanda?" "Yes, actually, why isn't the gas coming out?" "Oh well, what's happened is that the wound where the helium entered your body formed a one-way valve and the pressure within it is holding it shut. Actually, it's already started to heal up. We thought about pricking you with a pin, but we can't. You would literally pop like a balloon and it would kill you. Now, what would have happened, you see, Amanda, is that you've been very lucky." "Lucky?" "Yes, honestly. You see, if the nozzle had pierced the blood vessel, even a very small one, it would have caused gas to bubble into your blood and killed you almost immediately. If it had pierced an organ, it would have ruptured that organ and you would have died of internal bleeding. What happened to you, though, is that the gas filled a gap between your skin and your insides. We haven't even got a word to describe your condition, so let's just call you lucky." "Okay, doctor, well, how are you going to get the gas out?" "With the previous case, we just had to wait and it went down completely in a couple of days, but she was nowhere near as full as you are. If it had gone on for a fraction of a second longer, you really wouldn't be here. Not even your body would have been here because you would have exploded into 1,000 pieces. As I say, you've been amazingly lucky." Just as the doctor had said, I did start to deflate quite soon, but altogether it took around 2 weeks. While this process was going on, various things happened. I watched videos and saw newspaper reports on my predicament. When I first saw it, I looked like I couldn't believe it was really all me. I was just this huge balloon in a brilliant red sweatsuit with limbs sticking out in all directions and a tiny looking blonde head at the top. That wasn't the end either. Since my skin had been stretched so much, it was now constantly baggy and floppy, which made me feel deeply self-conscious. I sold my stories for Women's Magazine and a TV documentary was made about me. The shop made me a huge amount of compensation and I was set up for life. But I still had the problem of my now very baggy and stretched skin. Then one day a surgeon came to see me. "I have a proposition for you, Amanda, which might go some way towards sorting out your, how shall I put it, cosmetic problem." It turned out the surgeon was paid by an advertising agency. His solution was ingenious. He would fit me with a valve that would enable air or some other gas to be pumped under my skin, as had happened during the accident, but this time in a controlled manner. In this way, I would be able to choose exactly my body shape, the breasts I wanted, the buttocks I wanted, and so on. I started a new career very much in demand to advertise various products such as anti-flatulence medicines, weight loss programs and so forth. In everyday life I chose to make myself big and busty with an ample bottom, but I had as much control over my body's appearance as I did over what makeup or clothes I wore. By the time my movie career started, I was well on the way to making my first million. But the best thing of all was I overcame my shyness.